This is the press conference after the end of the 2023 consultation with the Republic of Palau, between the IMF and the Republic of Palau. So we were here for the past 2 weeks having discussions and meetings and a close engagement with the government of Palau, other government officials and state-owned enterprises, private sector, development partners, with a really broad range of partners who are relevant in Palau. And this is today is the end of our Article 4 consultation. We have Article 4 consultations with all of our member countries. Last consultation with the Republic of Palau was in 2021. And we're here to report and inform the media and the public on our main conclusions from the Article 4 consultation. And we would like to first thank Minister and the whole government of Palau for their hospitality and their candid discussions with us. We learned a lot about Palau, and we hope that some of our conclusions and policy advice would be of use and helpful to Palau and policymakers. Thank you. Maybe with that, I can give you a brief overview of our key findings. So first, I'd like to make the point that coming out of the pandemic, if you look at the Palauan economy, it's facing significant challenges. Pandemic was associated with a significant output loss. Output declined by about 25% of its 2019 level. And Palau came out of the pandemic with high external debt and historically high inflation. But the outlook is more positive. We see the recovery in the horizon. And we also note that the compact agreement has been signed with the United States, and that improves Palau's macroeconomic outlook over the medium term. We would like to commend the authorities for the important reforms that they undertook to enhance fiscal responsibility and modernize the tax system, and also for taking steps to reform the pension system. But while the outlook is much better, there are still important structural challenges that will be there, that will need to be addressed by Palau. First is the dependence on tourism and exposure to climate events. And thirdly, the recent increase in outward migration. These are the key challenges that will raise vulnerabilities. And going forward, reforms to attract investment, diversify the economy, and improve the infrastructure and climate resilience will be important, as well as reskilling the labor force can help raise growth and make it more sustainable. In terms of our outlook and in terms of our projections, we expect output to expand by 0.8% this fiscal year 2023, after contracting for 3 consecutive years prior. That we see as reflecting the weakness in the construction sector, as well as the recovery in tourism that was not as strong as we had expected. But we see more recently significant improvement in the tourism activity, and we expect that to derive growth next year. And our growth projection for next year is 12.4%. We note that inflation increased significantly over the past 2 years. We expect inflation to reach 13.2% in this fiscal year 2023. We note that the increase in inflation was driven by a triple shock. It was driven by higher imported food and fuel prices, the implementation of the Palauan goods and services tax, as well as sizable one-off utility tariff increases. So it was a combination of a lot of different factors that led to historically high inflation rates. But the good news is that we think those effects will subside next year. So our projection for inflation for next year is 5.4%, which reflects still some of the base effects from last year. And we expect it to come down even further in the outer years, back towards Palau's historically low inflation rates. In terms of risks to the outlook in the near-term risks are tilted to the downside. They include potential delays in the U.S. Congress approval of the new COFA agreement. Weakness in tourism recovery is another risk, and also potential weather-related events, for example, potential droughts related to El Niño. Global risks are also tilted to the downside and include an abrupt global slowdown and commodity price volatility. In terms of our fiscal outlook, we see that this year the fiscal performance has been much better than we had expected. We are coming back towards Palau's pre-pandemic normal level of sort of balanced fiscal balances, so positive fiscal balances. But yet we recommend continued fiscal prudence given the uncertainties next year. We do recommend the adoption of a medium-term fiscal strategy that would support Palau's development objectives and targets building fiscal buffers and resilience. This could be complemented by improving expenditure efficiency and also improving public financial management and solidifying the tax reforms that were implemented, which are already yielding important and good benefits, that they are increasing revenues. We think that fiscal policy should remain tight given the inflationary environment, but further efforts can be made to protect the most vulnerable. The IMF team commends the government for Social Security Reform Bill, which, if passed swiftly, will bring the system in line with good practice. And ongoing efforts to reform the Civil Service Pension Fund scheme remains a key priority going forward. We also note that in the financial system, as the pandemic-related support measures expire, asset quality should be watched carefully. There's also scope to enhance Palau's financial system's contribution to growth and stability by lifting structural impediments, including lack of collateral and record-keeping practices. The establishment of a credit bureau could help banks better manage their credit risk and could increase the provision of credit. We recommend a cautious and gradual approach to digital initiatives. We think that the authorities should close existing gaps in the regulatory and governance frameworks and strengthen the country's AML-CFT framework before exposing the financial system to new risks. On the structural reform side, advancing measures to diversify the economy and boost private investment are important. We think that the government's National Development Plan is a good step forward. And this strategic national plan can identify development priorities and actions and can help guide the careful balancing of different development needs and trade-offs in the context of Palau's enhanced macro-fiscal envelope under the new compact agreement.
So let me just say we appreciate being a member of the International Monetary Fund, and that these visits that we have had since we joined the fund are very useful to our policy planning and reflect on the economy that provides us with insight into how to improve the business climate, the investment climate, the social development of the country, such as through our civil service pension plan and social security program reforms. So this visit was very welcome as our economy starts to head out from the pandemic, and as we start to see the impacts of the reforms that we undertook as part of the pandemic positioning with the policy-based loans that we took from the Asian Development Bank. This particular visit was very busy. The mission members here had many visits with many different parties on our side. And I think their preliminary findings on their report reflect where we are and where we would like to go. So we appreciate the information that they've been able to look at and to reflect on back to the government. Of course, when they get back, they will be preparing reports that need also to be approved, and those will be the official reports that we receive and will comment on and decide which direction that the country should consider going based on those findings and findings from our other partners and friends. So this is the second mission that I've been involved in. As Elif says, first one was in 2021. Although we did not hold a press conference for that mission, I'm happy that we can do it now. I think the information is important for people to hear, as well as our leadership need to hear an independent assessment of where they believe we are, and that will help inform how fast we move and in which direction. I think those are important questions for us to start discussing now, more so into next year. So I'm very happy with the team, and I hope they enjoyed Palau. They were also tourists here, so we appreciate their contributions to our economy. But I think it's more important that you have, the press especially, has access to the team, and they can ask any questions that you think need to be asked for clarification or information as you see necessary. So thank you for coming to the press conference, and I look forward to your questions.
Monsieur Minister, good afternoon, IMF team. So you mentioned a new report, outlook. The economic outlook is good. And if my understanding, my understanding of that is to come with how our government has been trying to diversify away from the tourism-based economy that we have. So, and then early on in this administration, the first year, to be exact, the administration passed a major piece of revenue-generating legislation, or legislation that would attract businesses and would help expand our tax base. And these are the digital residency, the corporate registry, arbitration bill, and so forth. There are some major legislations. So did you factor those into that assessment? Like how is Palau's ability to generate income through those pieces of legislation, or it's just it not factor into this assessment at this point?
We have not directly incorporated those initiatives. I think it's perhaps still early days to make that assessment. We are seeing the recovery in tourism, and the recovery we think will be driven by tourism. But what we do support is increasing value added from tourism and increasing links to other sectors from tourism that we think can be important. Also, diversifying the source countries for tourism arrivals. That's another way to increase the resilience. In our experience, raising growth significantly for small states like Palau will be difficult without sort of expanding the export base significantly. And again, being a small state, it's also challenging to expand the export space. So what we think is a good step forward, and this is consistent with the authorities' views and vision for tourism, is to increase value added from tourism and make sure that the tourism activity also benefits other sectors. There are closer links to other sectors, for example, agriculture or increasing cultural experiences. Those kinds of initiatives could help support growth.
Thank you. So from this issue of inflation has been a big topic of discussions, especially with the high energy prices, PTSD, and it's been like that since the COVID. So my question is, there's discussions or there's move from the leadership, and the last fiscal year they increased the government salary across the board by $60 every pay period, and now there's a move again to increase it another $60 pay period, and there's also legislation that's in the Congress that seeks to increase the minimum wage to, I think, $5. And so what the discussion and the concern from that is out there is that this is going to add on to the already high inflation that we are experiencing at this point. Can you comment on that?
So you are absolutely right. Inflation has increased considerably in Palau. As I mentioned earlier, we think that this was a combination of like a triple shock, if you will. And it was driven by import prices, higher fuel and food import prices, the tariff increases, and also the introduction of the PGST, which led the businesses to actually raise prices across the board, which is not what we had anticipated. So this was a sort of the way the businesses reacted to the PGST. Now, what you're saying is that the increase in the wage bill with $60 for everyone across the board, we understand why the government wanted to do that because inflation did increase significantly. But normally, what we would advise is to actually more directly support in a more targeted way households that are more vulnerable, because it's a $60 increase that goes to everyone. That's kind of we understand the rationale and the reason, but we would normally advise to make it not through the wage system or the minimum wage, but make it compensate vulnerable households through more direct cash transfers. That's not always feasible, so that's the first best. And in many countries, we don't achieve the first best because it's not feasible. So that would be my response.
Thank you. Minister, do you have anything to add up or say in regards to that concern?
On the second one, not so much. The first one, regarding those reforms that we implemented, many of them involve improving the investment climate here. And of course, since investors have not really started coming back yet, we're not seeing much impact. And of course, these are reforms that have to be used. So if they're not used, we don't have experience in how well they are working. But we are confident in those reforms and that they will have a positive effect on economic growth, which is what we're looking for. Make it easier for businesses to operate here, both local domestic companies as well as foreign companies. And it's a set of initiatives that the government has been pursuing for many years. We look forward to the one-stop shop, which is another example of those initiatives, to be open soon. If you pass by Bethlehem, you will see the building is nearing final completion. We look forward to moving our offices over there, so it makes it easier for people to come and access government services. We are working on additional reforms to improve access to government services, mostly through e-government initiatives for customers to use on the internet rather than having to physically come to our offices. And we think that is something that people are looking forward to. The second question on inflation is a very difficult one. I think people think that when the government does something, the reaction is immediate and in a particular direction, but it's not usually how things work. You try something, and if it doesn't work, you need to adjust. So I think that is something that we've been experiencing. The revenue projections weren't as high as we expected, but most economists try not to project anymore because it's been so difficult to do that accurately. And accuracy is very important when you're projecting government revenues because you're basing your expenditures on those revenues. So it has been very positive, despite the fact that we haven't received as many tourists as we had expected. We have collected more PGST. And my reaction to that is that we knew that there was a hole in the previous system, and we estimated what we call revenue neutral, not to collect more than what we were collecting before, and we collected much more, meaning the hole, the gap in our tax system was much larger than we had anticipated. So closing that gap has been really positive for the government, and at this time when we need to help people because of high inflation costs that are driven a lot by external factors, not by domestic factors, we do have some revenue that we can use to help people. And I know with my meetings with Congress that the OEK is very interested in trying to help people. We're looking for the best way to help them so that we help the people who need it most and not be too broad about our approach. So I think as the mission is said, the expectation is things will get better, and if the numbers that they're projecting are as they are, I think we can look for a very positive next year. But we have to be cautiously optimistic about those prospects and plan accordingly, especially with the budget. But I have asked Congress to consider passing a full-year budget and resist the temptation of a continuing resolution just to provide some stability for our government operations as we focus more on the reforms and bringing us out of the weaker economy that we've been experiencing for the past 3 years.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just going to ask this last question before I turn the mic over to OL here. So, here the issues that's been discussed, and then I just want to get your thoughts. Or I'm not sure if this is within the scope of Article 4 consultation mission, or I'm just going to put it out there. So, in regards to the higher inflation, the higher prices of goods, the cost of living is going up. And so the government, through budget process, also have put in there some subsidies, water, wastewater, and the power subsidies. So in your mission, your consultation, did you touch on those? And if those subsidies that has been put out there through legislation are enough, or would you recommend increase on those, or just to deal with higher cost of living? Because once they passed the law for FY 2023, and then we have this inflation just keeps on going up. So maybe those subsidies are not enough. Do you ever kind of look into those and consider and maybe make a recommendation to the Minister of Finance that, to help with the economy, to help with alleviate the people's economic hardship? Maybe we can look at that way. Thank you.
No, we discussed these policies to offset the impact of higher inflation and increasing prices on households. So we discussed the subsidies. We also discussed some of the other measures, including the tax refunds for low-income households. So we welcome these measures to support households. There could be scope to improve their targeting over time, and I think it's something that should be studied carefully by the government to see, to what extent these support measures were sort of compensating for the income losses or the purchasing power losses of the low-income households. And if there is still gaps to be filled, we would encourage the government to make further efforts to support low-income households. But it would require a careful analysis of who's benefiting from the different subsidies, by how much, and whether they are sufficient to compensate them. We note that there is a household consumption and income survey. We think that's a very important piece of information that the government can use to look at this question. But our general policy advice is to we welcome the efforts because there are already efforts that was made. And we would encourage the government to look at further efforts if needs be, but after a careful study. And certainly, if there are additional shocks, we would encourage further efforts to compensate low-income households, because it is a very important issue for Palauans. So we would like to highlight that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For fiscal 2024?
Fiscal year 2024.
Can you just go through that?
Of course. So our projection is for growth to reach 12.4%, and that's mainly driven by the tourism recovery. So we are expecting tourist arrivals to increase from about 30,000 to 70,000 arrivals. And we expect that to contribute significantly to growth. But we also expect private investment to pick up. We're aware of several projects, both on the tourism side, some big hotels, but also on the infrastructure side, we're aware of several infrastructure projects. So, for example, in the communications sector. So those projects will also support growth through the construction sector, for example.
Did you also look at the construction values for plans?
We try to integrate, but we don't, have as good information, of course. So we try to reflect it, but it's still subject to a lot of uncertainty, I would say. So we try to get a best assessment. Yeah.
And this report, when do you anticipate moving forward?
Probably sometime in November. This report will be written and it will be discussed in our executive board. And after that, it will be published maybe after a lag of a week or 2 weeks.
In the year before, was that you guys personally, or was it another team that was here before?
So it was a different team, a completely different team, actually. So I have... Oh, Ricardo was part of it, but you did not come here. It was a virtual mission. Yeah. Yeah.
Was that the 2021?
Yes,
Virtual
yes,
mission?
yes. It was a virtual mission.
How is it seeing it personally versus, virtual?
I want to.
Place like Palau. It must be in person. Anybody who's missing this opportunity is missing a lot.
Can you say that and look at the camera? Well, I think I asked that because one of the things I would be curious about is how your experience was, how your experiences compared in terms of, ECTA, what sort of, if that sort of lent itself to maybe sort of a more positive outlook that you're looking at moving forward.
No, absolutely. We were here last November on a shorter visit, and we can definitely see the difference in activity. There's definitely a lot more activity, more people in the Rock Islands. So we definitely took note of that. Things are looking up. We are aware of new flights coming in and coming online next year. So hopefully this year. Every year we're projecting the recovery to start next year, but I think this year I hope and think that the recovery will take hold next year. Yeah.
So just quickly,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that the risk,
Mhm.
for example, like the tourism recovery, the delay in the compact.
Mm-hmm.
So do you kind of like quantify those, like how much of a risk are those?
It's a very hard question. We don't quantify it. We try to qualitatively think about a scenario where, for example, compact doesn't come as planned next year, or let's say it doesn't come throughout the next couple of years. What would its impact be on growth? What would it be its impact on the fiscal position? So we try to go through some scenarios like that. And we can elaborate more on that in our report. So, yeah.
I think I think I would just like to know, as a Palau citizen, what you all see as Palau's sort of best asset. We talk about economic growth. We talk about diversifying tourism and economy. In your collective or individual opinions, what would you think would be Palau's greatest asset, and how could we capitalize on that?
I would say, I also would like the other mission team members to chip in, but for me, it's the nature, the pristine Palau is something I have not experienced anywhere. Just the richness of its nature, and also richness of its culture, which is something that I learned more about on this trip. So I think Palau has a very rich culture and tradition, a very interesting history. So I think these were some of the strong assets, I think. I don't know if others, please share.
To me, the Palauan people, and thank you for this opportunity to thank you all. Our experience is absolutely beautiful, kind, smiling, entrepreneurial, open-minded, very engaging people who are also very patient. Compared to November, we could see that there have been a lot of hardship, and the country is gradually emerging from this. Like, the recovery has been much slower than any of us would have wished, and so people coping with that, being hit with this large inflationary shocks from all these sources. We really appreciate that you keep the smile. We hope that we are right this time around, that the good times on the horizon, so please keep it up. And Palau is making a lot of progress, pioneering many initiatives. It's not necessarily easy, so go Palau. And we would like to come back and bring more people.
Yes, please do.
No, I would say it's hard to add after this beautiful discussion, but the guiding to me has been spectacular. So I think it's gone back in many places around the world, and back in the years among the top.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are the questions. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Having us in your beautiful country, we really enjoyed it and look forward to coming back.
And bring people.
I'm bringing my family. We are definitely coming as a family next time.
And that's advertising to everyone I know and then some.
Thank you. So I guess the outlook is improving already.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So if I can just close and personally thank the mission myself for the great work that they did and the effort they put into this visit. Also thank the press for coming here and helping to share this information with Palauans and our friends who are staying with us and those outside of us who are watching what's happening, how we're faring, what the outlook is going forward. So if there are any questions, feel free to contact the ministry and we'll be able to provide you with additional information or at least find some answers for the questions you may have based on what findings that the team has been able to find this time around. Thank you again.
Thank you.